Harold Morrison woke up at 6 in the morning, just like he had every day for the past 50 years. The old man stretched his tired bones and looked out the window of his small apartment. The sun was just starting to rise over the quiet neighborhood. At 78 years old, Harold still kept the same schedule he had learned in the army many years ago. He put on his favorite shirt, the blue one with small buttons, and reached for his old military cap. The cap was faded and worn, but Harold wore it with pride. It reminded him of his time serving his country in Korea when he was just a young man. Those days seemed so long ago now. Harold walked slowly to his kitchen and made a cup of coffee. His hands shook a little as he poured the hot water. Getting old was not easy, but he tried to stay strong. He had lived alone since his wife Martha died 3 years ago. His children lived far away, and he only saw his granddaughter Emma a few times a year. After breakfast, Harold picked up his worn leather wallet and checked inside. His monthly pension check had arrived yesterday, and he needed to deposit it at the bank. He also wanted to ask about opening a small savings account for Emma. She was starting college next year, and Harold wanted to help her pay for school. The walk to First National Bank took Harold about 15 minutes. His legs were not as strong as they used to be, so he walked slowly and carefully. The morning air was fresh, and he enjoyed seeing the neighbors working in their gardens. Mrs. Peterson waved at him from her front porch, and he waved back with a smile. First National Bank was a large building made of red brick. Harold had been going to this bank for over 20 years. He knew most of the people who worked there, or at least he thought he did. Many of the older employees had retired, and now there were mostly young people working behind the counters. Harold pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The bank was cool and quiet. Only a few customers were waiting in line. He took his place behind a young mother with 2 small children. The children were running around and making noise, but Harold smiled at them. They reminded him of his own grandchildren when they were little. When it was his turn, Harold walked up to the teller window. A young woman with blonde hair was sitting behind the glass. Her name tag said Jessica. She was looking at her phone and did not look up when Harold approached. "Good morning," Harold said politely. "I would like to deposit my pension check." "Please." Jessica finally looked up from her phone. She had a bored expression on her face. "Yeah, whatever," she said. "Give me your check and ID." Harold was surprised by her rude tone, but he handed over his check and driver's license. Jessica took them without saying thank you. She typed something on her computer while chewing gum loudly. "Is there anything else?" Jessica asked, still not looking at Harold. "Yes," Harold said. "I would like to ask about opening a savings account for my granddaughter. She is going to college next year, and I want to help her save money." Jessica rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. "Seriously? Another account? Why do you old people always want to open new accounts? Do you even understand how banking works?" Harold felt his face turn red. He was embarrassed and confused by her mean words. "I just want to help my granddaughter," he said quietly. "Look, old man," Jessica said in a loud voice, "maybe you should ask your family to help you with this stuff. You seem confused about what you want." Other customers in the bank started to look over at Harold. He felt their eyes on him and wished he could disappear. He had never been spoken to like this before, especially not in public. "I am not confused," Harold said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I just want to open a simple savings account." Jessica laughed and turned to another employee nearby. "Hey, Sarah, come here. This old guy wants to open another account, but I think he's getting mixed up." Sarah walked over with a smirk on her face. She was also young, maybe in her 20s. "What's the problem?" she asked. "He wants to open an account for his granddaughter, but he can't explain it properly," Jessica said loudly. "I think he's having one of those senior moments." Both women laughed, and Harold felt his heart sink. He had served his country with honor, worked hard his whole life, and raised a good family. He did not deserve to be treated like this. Then a man in a suit walked out of an office behind the teller windows. His name tag said, Brad Wilson, Assistant Manager. He was young, maybe 30 years old, with slicked back hair and an expensive-looking watch. "What's going on here?" Brad asked, looking annoyed. This elderly customer is having trouble explaining what he wants, Jessica said. I think he might be confused. Brad looked at Harold with an impatient expression. Sir, maybe you should come back when you have a family member with you. Sometimes older people need help understanding these financial matters. Harold felt like he had been slapped in the face. I understand perfectly well, he said. I just want to open a savings account for my granddaughter's college fund. Right, Brad said with a fake smile. But maybe it would be better if someone younger could help you make these decisions. Banking can be complicated for people your age. By now, several customers were watching the scene. Harold could hear them whispering to each other. Some looked sorry for him, but others seemed to agree with the bank employees. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside, Brad said. You're holding up the line and other customers need service? Harold felt tears forming in his eyes, but he tried not to let them fall. He had faced enemy soldiers in Korea, but this public humiliation hurt worse than any physical pain he had ever felt. Please, Harold said one more time. I just want to help my granddaughter. Look, Jessica said with a loud sigh. Maybe you should go home and take a nap. Come back when you can think more clearly. The words hit Harold like a punch to the stomach. He picked up his wallet and his bank receipt with shaking hands. Without saying another word, he turned and walked toward the door as he left the bank. Harold could hear the employees laughing behind him. Other customers stared at him as he passed. He kept his head down and walked as quickly as his old legs would carry him outside the bank. Harold stopped and took a deep breath. The fresh air felt good after the cold, cruel atmosphere inside. He put his military cap back on his head and straightened his shoulders. He had been through worse things in his life, but this hurt in a different way. Harold began the slow walk back to his apartment. He thought about calling his son to tell him what happened, but he felt too ashamed. How could he explain that he had been treated like a child in front of strangers? As he walked, Harold noticed things he had not seen on his way to the bank. There were security cameras on every corner. Cars with tinted windows were parked in strange places. His old training was starting to kick in. Even though he tried to push those thoughts away, Harold Morrison had spent many years noticing details that other people missed. It was a skill that had served him well in the army and later in his government work. Even though he was upset and embarrassed, his sharp eyes were still working. The old veteran had no idea that his terrible morning at the bank would soon change everything. Harold walked slowly down Maple Street toward his apartment building. His legs felt heavy, and not just from his age. The cruel words from the bank employees kept playing in his mind like a broken record. He had never been treated with such disrespect, especially not in public. Mrs. Chen was watering her flowers in the front yard when she saw Harold coming down the sidewalk. She had lived next door to Harold and his late wife Martha for 15 years. Mrs. Chen was a kind woman from Taiwan who always looked out for her neighbors. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," she called out with a warm smile. But when she looked closer, she could see that something was wrong. Harold's shoulders were slumped, and he was not walking with his usual proud posture. "Oh, my," Mrs. Chen said, setting down her watering can. "Are you feeling all right? You look upset." Harold stopped walking and tried to force a smile. "I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. Just a little tired, that's all." But Mrs. Chen had raised 5 children and could tell when someone was hurting. "Come sit on my porch for a minute," she said gently. "I just made some fresh tea." Harold wanted to go straight to his apartment and hide, but Mrs. Chen was so kind that he could not refuse. He followed her up the steps to her small front porch and sat down in one of her wooden chairs. Mrs. Chen brought out 2 cups of hot tea and sat down beside Harold. "Now tell me what happened," she said. "I have never seen you look so sad." Harold stared into his teacup for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to tell Mrs. Chen about his morning at the bank. He described how the young teller had been rude to him, how she had spoken loudly so other customers could hear, and how the assistant manager had suggested he was too old to handle his own money. "It made me feel like I was stupid," Harold said quietly. like I was just some confused old man who didn't know what he was doing. Mrs. Chen listened carefully, and her face grew angry as Harold told his story. "That is terrible," she said. "You are one of the smartest people I know. How dare they treat you that way?" Harold shook his head. "Maybe they were right. Maybe I'm just getting too old." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You are not too old, and you are certainly not stupid. Those people at the bank are the ones with the problem, not you." Harold finished his tea and stood up slowly. "Thank you for listening, Mrs. Chen. You are very kind." "Any time, Mr. Morrison," she said. "And don't you let those rude people make you feel bad about yourself. You are a good man." Harold walked to his own apartment and unlocked the front door. The small apartment was quiet and neat. Everything was in its proper place, just the way Martha used to keep it. Harold hung his military cap on the hook by the door and sat down in his favorite chair. He looked around the living room and saw the photos that covered the walls. There were pictures of him and Martha on their wedding day, photos of their children when they were young, and several pictures of Harold in his army uniform. But there were other photos, too, pictures that most people would not understand. On the bookshelf was a photo of Harold standing next to a man in an expensive suit. The man was shaking Harold's hand and presenting him with a medal. Most people would think it was just another military award, but it was actually much more than that. Harold walked over to his small home office and sat down at his desk. The desk was covered with papers, books, and more photographs. On the wall, behind the desk, were several framed certificates and awards. One certificate was from the Department of Defense. Another was from the Central Intelligence Agency. A third was from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harold Morrison was not just any elderly veteran. For 30 years after his military service in Korea, he had worked for the United States government in ways that most people could never imagine. He had been an intelligence officer, a spy, and an investigator. He had helped solve crimes, stop terrorist attacks, and protect national security. Harold opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old address book. The pages were yellow with age, but the phone numbers inside were still good. These were not the phone numbers of regular people. They were the private numbers of FBI agents, CIA officers, and other government officials who had worked with Harold over the years. Harold found the number he was looking for and picked up his phone. He dialed carefully, his fingers still steady, despite his age. "Agent Mitchell speaking," came a voice on the other end. "Sarah, this is Harold Morrison," he said. "Harold," Sarah Mitchell said with surprise and pleasure. "It's so good to hear from you. How are you doing?" Sarah Mitchell was a senior FBI investigator who had worked with Harold on several important cases over the years. She was now in charge of the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division. Harold had taught her many things about investigating complex criminal operations. "I'm doing well, Sarah," Harold said. "But I need to talk to you about something important." "Of course," Sarah said, her tone becoming more serious. "What's going on?" Harold took a deep breath. "I was at First National Bank this morning, and I saw some things that concerned me." For the next 20 minutes, Harold told Sarah everything that had happened at the bank. But he did not just talk about how the employees had treated him. He talked about the things his trained eyes had noticed while he was there. Harold had seen one of the tellers quickly closing computer screens when customers approached. He had heard parts of phone conversations about transfers and special accounts. He had noticed that certain employees seemed nervous when handling large amounts of cash. The assistant manager, Brad Wilson, was acting very strange, Harold said. "When I was talking to the teller, I saw him watching me from his office. He seemed worried about something, not just annoyed." Harold had also noticed that some customers were treated very differently than others. While he was being humiliated, he saw other customers who were allowed to conduct large transactions without showing proper identification. "Sarah," Harold said, "I think there might be something illegal going on at that bank." Sarah listened carefully to everything Harold said. She knew that Harold Morrison had one of the sharpest minds she had ever worked with. If he thought something was wrong, then something was probably very wrong. "What exactly do you think is happening?" Sarah asked. "Money laundering?" Harold said without hesitation. The patterns I saw today are consistent with a money laundering operation. Multiple employees are involved, and they have been doing this for a while. Harold explained how certain employees seemed to know each other very well, almost like they were working as a team. He had noticed that they used hand signals and code words when talking to each other. These were not the actions of honest bank employees. The way they treated me was not just rude, Harold said. It was designed to make me want to leave quickly. They didn't want me asking questions or staying around long enough to see what they were really doing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Harold Morrison had never been wrong about this kind of thing. His observations had led to the arrest of dozens of criminals over the years. "Harold," Sarah said, "I need you to write down everything you remember about today. Every detail, no matter how small. Can you do that for me?" "Already done," Harold said with a slight smile. "I wrote it all down as soon as I got home. Old habits die hard." "I'm going to drive over to your place right now," Sarah said. "This is too important to discuss over the phone." "I'll be here," Harold said. After he hung up the phone, Harold sat back in his chair and looked at the photos on his desk. There was one picture that he particularly liked. It showed him receiving a special award from the FBI director for his work on a major case involving organized crime. The young bank employees who had mocked him that morning had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw an old man with a worn military cap and shaking hands. They did not see the brilliant mind that had spent decades catching criminals much smarter than they were. Harold Morrison had been humiliated and embarrassed, but he was not defeated. His sharp eyes and trained mind had noticed things that could bring down an entire criminal operation. The people who had treated him so badly were about to learn a very important lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who look the most harmless. And sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who will bring you down. Harold made himself another cup of coffee and waited for Agent Mitchell to arrive. The quiet old man who had been mocked at the bank was about to show the world what he was really capable of. Agent Sarah Mitchell drove through the quiet streets of Harold's neighborhood in her black government car. She had worked with the FBI for 20 years, but she still felt excited when Harold Morrison called her. Harold had been her mentor when she first joined the bureau, and he had taught her everything she knew about investigating financial crimes. Sarah remembered the first time she met Harold 15 years ago. She was a young agent who thought she knew everything about catching criminals. Harold was supposed to be retired, but the FBI had asked him to help with a complicated case involving stolen government money. Sarah had been assigned to work with him. At first, Sarah thought Harold was just another old man who was living in the past. He was quiet, polite, and seemed to move slowly. But within days, Sarah realized she was working with a genius. Harold could see patterns that other investigators missed. He could look at a pile of papers and immediately know which ones were important. He could watch people for just a few minutes and understand their secrets. Over the years, Harold had helped Sarah solve some of the most difficult cases of her career. He had taught her how to think like a criminal, how to spot lies, and how to follow money trails that led to the truth. When Harold finally retired for good 5 years ago, Sarah felt like she had lost her best teacher. Now Harold was calling her again, and Sarah knew it was important. Harold never called unless he had found something serious. She parked her car in front of Harold's apartment building and walked quickly to his door. Harold answered the door before Sarah could knock. "Come in, Sarah," he said with a small smile. "I have coffee ready." Sarah followed Harold into his small living room. She had been here many times before, but she always enjoyed looking at Harold's photos and awards. Most people would never know that this quiet old man had helped protect the country for so many years. "Tell me everything," Sarah said as she sat down on Harold's couch. Harold handed her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Then he opened a folder that was sitting on his coffee table. Inside were several pages of notes written in Harold's neat handwriting. "I went to First National Bank this morning to deposit my pension check," Harold began. "What happened to me personally is not important. What is important is what I observed while I was there. Harold opened his folder and pulled out the first page of notes. Sarah leaned forward to listen carefully. The bank has at least 12 employees working during the morning shift, Harold said. But only 4 of them seem to be part of the operation. Jessica Thompson is the main teller. She handles most of the suspicious transactions. Brad Wilson is the assistant manager and he supervises the operation. There are 2 other tellers, Sarah Martinez and Kevin Chun, who work with them. Harold explained how he had watched these 4 employees work together like a team. They used hand signals, code words, and special procedures that the other employees did not seem to know about. Jessica would receive certain customers and immediately signal to Brad, Harold continued. Brad would then give her special instructions. Sometimes she would count money in a different way. Sometimes she would use a different computer terminal. Sarah took notes as Harold talked. She had seen similar patterns in other money laundering cases. "What about the customers?" Sarah asked. "Did you notice anything unusual about them?" Harold nodded and turned to the next page in his folder. 3 customers came in while I was there who were clearly part of the scheme. They did not wait in line like normal customers. They went straight to Jessica's window, and she knew exactly what they wanted. Harold described how these special customers carried large amounts of cash in ordinary shopping bags. They did not fill out the usual forms that banks require for large deposits. Jessica processed their money quickly and quietly without asking any questions. One man deposited over $10,000 in cash, Harold said, but Jessica did not file the required government form. She just put the money in the system as if it were a normal deposit. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. In the United States, banks are required by law to report all cash deposits over $10,000 to the government. If Jessica was not filing these reports, then the bank was breaking federal law. "Did you see where the money went after it was deposited?" Sarah asked. "That's the interesting part," Harold said with a slight smile. "I watched the computer screen while Jessica was working. The money was immediately transferred to other accounts. Some went to accounts in different banks. Some went to accounts in other countries." Harold had also noticed that the bank's security cameras were not working properly. Several cameras were pointed away from the teller windows where the suspicious activity was happening. "This is not a simple crime," Harold said. "This is a professional operation that has been running for a long time. They have systems in place to hide their tracks and avoid detection." Sarah finished writing her notes and looked up at Harold. "How sure are you about all of this?" Harold looked at her with his sharp blue eyes. "Sarah, I have been investigating crimes for 50 years. I am absolutely sure that First National Bank is being used to launder money for organized crime." Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the quiet street and thought about what Harold had told her. If he was right, then they were dealing with a major criminal operation that could involve millions of dollars. "Harold," she said, "I need to call my team immediately. We need to start surveillance on the bank right away." "There's more," Harold said quietly. Sarah turned around to face him. "What do you mean?" Harold opened his folder to the last page of notes. "While I was at the bank, I heard Jessica talking on the phone to someone. She was speaking quietly, but I could hear some of what she said. She mentioned a name, Vincent Torino." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Vincent Torino was a known crime boss who had been under FBI investigation for years. The Bureau had never been able to prove that he was involved in money laundering, but they had always suspected it. "If Torino is involved, then this is much bigger than just one bank," Sarah said. "This could be part of a national crime network," Harold nodded. "That's exactly what I think. The bank is just one piece of a much larger operation." Sarah pulled out her phone and called her supervisor. "At the FBI. Agent Mitchell here," she said. "I need an emergency meeting with the Financial Crimes Division. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." While Sarah was on the phone, Harold continued to study his notes. He had noticed many other small details that morning, and he was starting to see how they all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. When Sarah finished her phone call, she sat back down next to Harold. My team is assembling now, she said. We're going to start watching the bank immediately. You need to be careful, Harold warned. These people are not amateurs. They will notice if you use obvious surveillance methods. Sarah smiled. Don't worry, Harold. You taught me well. We'll be invisible. Harold reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small device that looked like a regular pen. This is a recording device, he said. If you need me to go back to the bank and gather more information, I can do it. Sarah shook her head. Absolutely not. You've done enough already. These people could be dangerous. Sarah, Harold said firmly, I have been dealing with dangerous people my entire career. A few crooked bank employees don't scare me. Sarah looked at her old mentor and saw the determination in his eyes. Harold Morrison might be 78 years old, but his mind was still as sharp as ever, and he was angry about how he had been treated that morning. The people who humiliated me today have no idea what they have started, Harold said quietly. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man. They are about to learn how wrong they were. Sarah gathered her notes and stood up to leave. I'll call you as soon as we have more information, she said. And Harold ... thank you. This could be the break we've been looking for. After Sarah left, Harold sat in his chair and looked at his photos again. He thought about all the cases he had worked on over the years, all the criminals he had helped catch, and all the people he had protected. Harold Morrison had been humiliated and embarrassed that morning, but he was not a victim. He was a hunter, and he had found his prey. The employees at First National Bank thought they were smart, but they were about to face an opponent who was much smarter than they could ever imagine. The quiet old man with the worn military cap was about to show the world what real justice looked like. At exactly 11:30 in the morning, Agent Sarah Mitchell stood in the FBI command center and looked at the large screen showing First National Bank. Her team had been watching the bank for exactly 1 hour since Harold Morrison's phone call. What they had seen in that short time was enough to convince them that Harold was absolutely right. Team leaders, report status, Sarah said into her radio. Surveillance Team 1 in position, came the first response. We have clear visual on all entrances and exits. Surveillance Team 2 ready, said another voice. Electronic monitoring is active on all phone lines and computer systems. Financial Analysis Team standing by, reported a third agent. We have already identified suspicious transaction, Mr. Morrison's observations. Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came before a major operation. She had worked on hundreds of cases, but this one was special. Harold Morrison had given them a gift, and she was going to make sure they used it well. All units, this is Agent Mitchell, Sarah said into her radio. We have federal warrants for the arrest of 4 suspects and the seizure of all bank records. This is a coordinated operation. No one moves until I give the signal. Inside First National Bank, Jessica Thompson was having a normal Tuesday morning. She had no idea that FBI agents were watching her every move. She was busy processing transactions for the special customers who came in with large amounts of cash. At 11:45, a man in an expensive suit walked into the bank carrying a leather briefcase. Jessica smiled when she saw him. This was Mr. Romano, one of their most important special customers. He came to the bank twice a week with briefcases full of cash. Jessica immediately signaled to Brad Wilson, who was watching from his office. Brad nodded and walked over to the teller window. Good morning, Mr. Romano, Brad said quietly. Jessica will take care of you right away. Mr. Romano opened his briefcase and pulled out several bundles of cash. Each bundle contained $100 bills held together with rubber bands. Jessica began counting the money quickly and quietly. Outside the bank, FBI agents were recording everything they saw. They had special cameras that could see through the bank's windows, and they were watching Mr. Romano's transaction very carefully. Command, this is Surveillance 1, came a voice over Sarah's radio. Subject is depositing approximately $50,000 in cash. No paperwork being filed. Sarah smiled grimly. In the United States, any cash deposit over $10,000 must be reported to the government. By not filing the required forms, the bank was breaking federal law. Continue monitoring, Sarah replied. Do not intervene yet. Inside the bank, Jessica finished counting Mr. Romano's money. She typed something on her computer, and the money was immediately transferred to 3 different accounts. One account was in a bank in Miami, another account was in a bank in Las Vegas, the third account was in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Financial analysis team, are you seeing this? Sarah asked. Yes, ma'am, came the reply. The money is being split and sent to known money laundering destinations. This is a textbook operation. At exactly 12 o'clock, 1 hour after Harold Morrison's phone call, Sarah Mitchell made her decision. All units, this is command, she said into her radio. Execute the operation. Go, go, go. Suddenly, black. SUVs appeared from every direction around First National Bank. FBI agents in tactical gear jumped out of the vehicles and surrounded the building. Police officers blocked all the streets leading to the bank, and traffic was stopped in both directions. Inside the bank, Jessica looked up from her computer screen and saw the FBI agents running toward the building. Her face turned white with fear. Brad, she screamed. Something's wrong. Brad Wilson looked out his office window and saw the FBI agents surrounding the bank. He knew immediately that their operation had been discovered. Everyone stay calm, Brad shouted to his employees. Just keep working like nothing is happening. But it was too late. The FBI agents were already inside the bank. Federal agents, shouted Agent Mitchell as she entered the building. Everyone put your hands where we can see them. The regular customers in the bank began to panic. They dropped to the floor and covered their heads with their hands. The innocent bank employees looked confused and frightened. Jessica Thompson, you are under arrest, Agent Mitchell said as she walked toward the teller window. You have the right to remain silent. Jessica started to cry as Agent Mitchell put handcuffs on her wrists. I didn't do anything wrong, she said. I was just doing my job. Your job was to file currency transaction reports, Agent Mitchell replied. You have been breaking federal law for months. While Agent Mitchell was arresting Jessica, other FBI agents were taking Brad Wilson into custody. Brad tried to act calm, but his hands were shaking. This is all a mistake, Brad said. I don't know what you think we did, but you're wrong. Agent Mitchell looked at Brad with cold eyes. We have been watching you for the past hour, she said. We saw you process $50,000 in cash without filing the required reports. We saw you transfer money to accounts in known money laundering destinations. Brad's face turned red with anger. You can't prove anything, he said. We are just regular bank employees doing our jobs. Actually, we can prove everything, Agent Mitchell said with a smile. We have video recordings, computer records, and phone conversations. But most importantly, we have a witness who saw everything you did. Brad looked confused. What witness? There were only regular customers in the bank this morning. Agent Mitchell leaned closer to Brad. Do you remember the elderly man you humiliated this morning? The one you said was too old to handle his own money? Brad's face went from red to white. That old man, he was just some confused veteran? That confused veteran, Agent Mitchell said, is Harold Morrison. He is a retired intelligence officer who has been investigating financial crimes for 50 years. He saw everything you did, and he reported it to the FBI? Brad stared at Agent Mitchell in shock. That's impossible. He was just some old guy who didn't understand banking. Mr. Morrison understood banking better than you do, Agent Mitchell replied. He also understood that you were running a money laundering operation for organized crime. While the arrests were taking place, other FBI agents were seizing computers, files, and equipment from the bank. They worked quickly and efficiently, collecting evidence that would be used in court. Agent Mitchell walked over to Mr. Romano, who was still standing by the teller window with his briefcase full of cash. Mr. Romano, you are also under arrest, she said. You are charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering. Mr. Romano tried to run toward the door, but FBI agents were waiting for him. He was arrested and handcuffed along with the bank employees. Outside the bank, news reporters were arriving to cover the story. Local television stations had received reports about the FBI raid. and they were setting up cameras to film the arrests. Agent Mitchell walked outside and spoke to the reporters. "Today the FBI has shut down a major money laundering operation," she said. "4 suspects have been arrested, and we have seized evidence of crimes totaling millions of dollars." One reporter asked, "How did you discover this operation?" Agent Mitchell smiled. "We received information from a concerned citizen who observed suspicious activity at the bank. This citizen contacted the FBI, and we were able to act quickly to stop the criminal operation." What Agent Mitchell did not tell the reporters was that the concerned citizen was the same elderly man who had been humiliated by the bank employees that morning. Harold Morrison had been mocked and treated like a confused old man, but he had gotten the last laugh. Inside the bank, Jessica Thompson sat in handcuffs and thought about what had happened. She remembered how she had laughed at the old man with the military cap. She remembered how she had called him confused and suggested he was too old to handle his own money. Now, Jessica realized that the old man had been watching her the entire time. He had seen her criminal activity, understood what she was doing, and reported her to the FBI. The person she had mocked as being too old and confused had been smart enough to bring down her entire operation. Brad Wilson was thinking the same thing as he sat in the back of an FBI car. He had treated Harold Morrison like a stupid old man who needed help from his family. Now Brad was the one who would need help from lawyers and maybe even his family to pay for them. The FBI raid had taken less than 30 minutes, but it had destroyed a criminal operation that had been running for over 2 years. Harold Morrison's sharp eyes and quick thinking had accomplished in 1 hour what other investigators had been trying to do for months. As the FBI cars drove away from First National Bank, Agent Mitchell thought about her old mentor. Harold Morrison had been humiliated and embarrassed that morning, but he had turned his bad experience into a victory for justice. The quiet old man with the worn military cap had proven once again that age and experience are more powerful than youth and arrogance. And the people who had underestimated him were now on their way to prison. 3 weeks after the FBI raid at First National Bank, Harold Morrison sat in his favorite chair and read the morning newspaper. The front page had a story about the criminal trial that was about to begin. The headline read, "Bank Money Laundering Ring Exposed by Local Veteran." Harold smiled as he read the article. The investigation had grown much bigger than anyone had expected. The FBI had discovered that First National Bank was just one part of a huge criminal network that operated in 12 different states. The money laundering operation had moved over $50 million in illegal cash over the past 2 years. Jessica Thompson, Brad Wilson, and the other bank employees had been charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. They were facing prison sentences of up to 20 years each. Mr. Romano and 15 other criminals had also been arrested and charged with related crimes. Harold put down the newspaper and looked at the letter that had arrived in his mail yesterday. It was from the director of the FBI, personally inviting Harold to a special ceremony in Washington, D.C. The letter said that Harold would be receiving the FBI's highest civilian honor. For his service to the country, Harold had received many awards during his long career, but this one felt different. This time, he had not been working as a government agent. He had just been an ordinary citizen who saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. The phone rang, and Harold answered it. "Hello? Mr. Morrison, this is Janet Williams. From Channel 7 News, we would like to interview you about your role in exposing the bank money laundering operation." Harold had been receiving calls from reporters for the past 3 weeks. Everyone wanted to hear his story. "I'm sorry, but I don't really want to be on television," he said politely. "But sir, you're a hero. People want to know how you were able to see what other people missed." Harold thought about this for a moment. "I'm not a hero," he said. "I'm just an old man who happened to notice some things that didn't look right." "But you solved a case that other investigators had been working on for months," Janet insisted. "How did you do it?" Harold smiled. "I learned a long time ago that the most important thing is to pay attention to details. Most people see what they expect to see. I try to see what is actually there." After he hung up the phone, Harold walked to his window and looked out at the street. Mrs. Chun was working in her garden, and she waved when she saw him. Harold waved back, remembering how kind she had been to him on that terrible morning 3 weeks ago. The doorbell rang, and Harold opened it to find Agent Sarah Mitchell standing on his porch. She was holding a large envelope and smiling. "Good morning, Harold," she said. "I have some news that I think you'll find interesting." Harold invited Sarah inside and made coffee for both of them. They sat down in the living room and Sarah opened her envelope. "The investigation is almost complete," she said. "We have arrested 23 people connected to the money laundering operation. We have also seized over $30 million in illegal profits." Harold nodded. "That's good news. What will happen to the bank?" "First National Bank is being closed permanently," Sarah said. "The federal government is taking over all of their assets. The honest employees will be helped to find new jobs, but the bank itself will never reopen." Sarah pulled out a folder from her envelope. "Harold, I want you to know that this case has become a model for how financial crime should be investigated. Your observations and methods are being taught to FBI agents all over the country." Harold felt proud but also a little sad. "I'm glad the case was successful, but I still feel bad about what happened to the innocent employees at the bank." "You shouldn't feel bad," Sarah said firmly. "The innocent employees are better off not working for criminals. And the criminals would have continued stealing money if you hadn't stopped them." Sarah opened her folder and pulled out several photographs. "Harold, there's something else I want to show you." The photograph showed Jessica Thompson, Brad Wilson, and the other bank employees being arrested. In one photo, Jessica was crying as she was led away in handcuffs. "When we arrested Jessica, she asked us how we had discovered the operation," Sarah said. "When we told her about your observations, she couldn't believe it. She kept saying that you were just a confused old man." Harold shook his head. "She still doesn't understand, does she?" "No, she doesn't," Sarah said. Even when faced with the evidence, she couldn't accept that someone she had dismissed as harmless had been smart enough to bring down her entire operation. Sarah pulled out another photograph. This one showed Brad Wilson sitting in an FBI interrogation room. He looked angry and frustrated. "Brad was even worse," Sarah said. "He kept insisting that you had gotten lucky. He said there was no way an old man could have understood what they were doing." Harold laughed quietly. "I suppose they learned that age and experience are not the same thing as being old and useless?" Sarah smiled. "They learned that lesson the hard way." A week later, Harold Morrison stood in the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. He was wearing his best suit and his military medals. The ceremony was being held in a large room filled with FBI agents, government officials, and reporters. FBI. Director Johnson walked to the podium and began to speak. "Today we honor a man who represents the best of American citizenship," he said. "Harold Morrison saw criminal activity and took action to stop it. His courage and intelligence have protected our country from organized crime." Harold walked to the front of the room as Director Johnson continued. Mr. Morrison's observations led to the arrest of 23 criminals and the seizure of over $30 million in illegal profits. His work has made our communities safer and our financial system more secure. Director Johnson turned to Harold and presented him with a gold medal. "On behalf of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the American people, I present you with the FBI Director's Award for Distinguished Public Service." Harold accepted the medal with shaking hands. The room erupted in applause, and Harold felt tears in his eyes. After all the years of secret work that nobody could know about, it felt good to be recognized publicly for his service. "Thank you," Harold said into the microphone. "I'm honored to receive this award, but I want everyone to know that I was just doing what any good citizen should do. When you see something wrong, you should speak up about it." Harold looked out at the audience and saw Agent Mitchell smiling at him. He also saw Mrs. Chun, who had been invited to the ceremony as his guest. "I also want to say something about respect," Harold continued. "Many people think that elderly citizens are not useful anymore. They think we are confused or out of touch. But older people have experience and wisdom that can be very valuable. We should not dismiss someone just because they are old." The audience applauded again, and Harold felt proud of what he had said. After the ceremony, Harold and Mrs. Chun had dinner at a nice restaurant in Washington. They talked about how much had changed since that terrible morning at the bank. "I'm so proud of you," Mrs. Chun said. "You turned a bad experience into something good for everyone." Harold smiled. "I couldn't have done it without friends like you who believed in me." The next morning, Harold and Mrs. Chun flew back home. When they arrived at the airport, they were surprised to find a group of people waiting for them. The local American Legion had organized a welcome home ceremony. Harold was presented with another award, this one from the American Legion for his continued service to his country. The mayor of their city also declared it Harold Morrison Day in honor of his achievement, but the moment that meant the most to Harold came when they arrived back at their neighborhood. Harold's granddaughter Emma was waiting for him at his apartment. She had driven 5 hours to be there when he got home. "Grandpa, I'm so proud of you," Emma said as she hugged him tightly. "Everyone at my college is talking about what you did." Harold hugged his granddaughter and felt happier than he had in years. "Emma, there's something I want to tell you. I opened that savings account for your college fund at a different bank. A much better bank where they treat their customers with respect," Emma laughed. "I love you, Grandpa." "You're the coolest old man in the world," Harold smiled. "I'm not old, Emma, I'm just experienced." That evening, Harold sat in his favorite chair and looked at his new medal. He thought about everything that had happened over the past month. He had been humiliated and embarrassed, but he had not given up. He had used his skills and experience to fight back against the people who had wronged him. The young bank employees who had mocked him had learned that respect is earned, not given based on age. They had also learned that underestimating someone can be a very dangerous mistake. Harold Morrison had proven that wisdom and experience are more powerful than youth and arrogance. He had shown that one person, no matter how old, can make a difference in the world. As Harold prepared for bed, he felt satisfied with what he had accomplished. He had served his country in war and peace, and he had never stopped fighting for what was right. The quiet old man with the worn military cap had reminded everyone that heroes come in all ages, and that justice is always worth fighting for. Outside his window, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Harold had made it a little safer for everyone, and that was all he had ever wanted to do.